lovely to see you all here. And welcome to the writers. We are going to be collecting some words and exploring your writing journeys. And because we are going to go on this journey of your writing, I'm not going to say a lot in advance about you, because I hope that in the course of the conversation, all the important information will transpire gradually. I'm just going to say that on my very far left is Diane Awerbuck, and in the middle is Sue. And please, may I ask you to pronounce your last name correctly for us?
So it's Sue Nyamnjoh.
Nyamnjoh.
Yes.
Yes.
Nyamnjoh.
Welcome.
Thank
and
you.
Here is Zibu Sithole. And the two of you are first-time debut authors. Diane isn't, but she's going to tell us all about that a little bit later. I would like to begin our journey of collecting words in a more geographical way. So I would like to ask you all, in geographical terms, how did you come to this place today, and where do you come from, and how did you travel to be here? So why don't you start?
Okay, I'll start. I was just thinking that's such a juicy question. Like, as you were asking, I pictured like a big map and little pins and points where things happened for me. So I grew up in different parts of the world. Started off in Cameroon, where I'm originally from. Then went down to Botswana, and then Senegal, and then finally back to Cameroon, and now in South Africa. So a lot of travel. And if I think of that in terms of writing, it exposed me to different kinds of writing, to different kinds of people, and to different kinds of settings. And all of that kind of combined to deliver certain experiences or certain feelings or certain perceptions about the world, And I remember, like, as a kid, in Senegal, in primary school, spending my lunches in the library. I look back, maybe there might have been some things surrounding that made it less than ideal for a child to be spending their times in the library. But I would leaf through the books, and then obviously coming to South Africa, it's a bit of a richer history, in terms of like the people, and obviously you can't really look at it without looking at apartheid and the effects of that, and that like wove its way into the writing that I consumed. So that just to say that in different areas that I found myself, I was always consuming different things by different people, and that informed like various perceptions. And obviously there were times that I was writing in different spaces, and different spaces have a way of opening up the writing. Because when you're away from the familiar, you kind of have to unearth certain things, and it's really beautiful to see what comes up then.
And Sue, how long have you been now in South Africa?
Since 2014, so my 10-year anniversary is next year.
Mm-hmm. And Zibu, and you, where do you come from, and what was your journey leading up to being here in Cape Town?
So it's not half as interesting as Sue's journey. I was born on the east of Johannesburg, in Ekurhuleni, in Thokoza, where I spent most of my life with my parents, and we moved from suburb to suburb. So becoming a writer was finding the interesting instead of looking at the interesting. There was nothing interesting to do. I mean, as a teenager, I lived in Groeneweider. So that's cabbage farms, potato farms, and the suburbs. So I spent a lot of time imagining a more interesting life, thinking about what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go, what I wanted to see. And I did see some of that stuff as a journalist, as a ghostwriter, as a storyliner, and eventually found my way back to Thokoza after the pandemic to focus a bit more on my writing, because most writers know that it is not the most financially sound decision to focus on your writing. So I moved back home to Thokoza, where I write now, and left there at 5 o'clock yesterday morning to get to the airport and come to Cape Town. Now here I am.
And just to tell you, at the very end, when you are getting the book signed, you need to ask Zibu to sign first because she's rushing off to the airport. So, Diane, before you tell us your journey here and where you come from, could you please read a passage from your book?
The turtles one.
Yeah, the turtles one.
I don't know if you're going to like this, guys. It's not good news. Hi, I'm from Kimberley, which is the exact center of South Africa. As my friend once said, if you wanted to give the world an enema, Kimberley would be the place to start because of the big hole. Okay. In all seriousness, as a white person, I struggled deciding about what I can and can't write about with knowledge or authority. So this was a new thing for me. So I hope you're sitting comfortably. It's called Turtles. What can I say? I was shortlisted for a story award. There's no rhyme to these things. Literary decisions are often random. They're hardly ever unanimous. Think how many writers there are in the world. They're sheer numbers, scrabbling over one another like turtles. Sometimes there's a judge who likes the rainbow glint and play of light on your shell, who lifts you up out of the water, your legs paddling slowly against the cool air. The judge exclaims that this one's different. This one is special, set apart from its mates, and that's all. Nevertheless, it happened, and I was to go to Ghana for 10 days, first Accra and then Elmina, to resorts and slave lodges, to step sideways out of my sweated teaching and my bleached middle life, to write a new story for the collection they would publish. I'm from the salty south. We are uncomfortable here. We've learned to live with the blood and contradictions, the shameful binaries, the heat. The iron in our souls sets us to rest. But up north, the warmth is different. A slow, misty gauze, too hot for dancing. A mirror, a veil, a cataract. The light glinting white over the water that swallowed the slaves and the men who stole them. The water that swallowed them and also spread them to other waiting continents, their bones and shells, another calcareous layer, along the familiar seabed, along the foreign shore.
So, Diane, you said Kimberley. Now, Cape Town is home.
Fishhook. Just want to say the Fishhook Library's got a stand there. They are recruiting. They want you to be a member. Doesn't have to be Fishhook. I just want to say, libraries, please, belong and bring your books back on time.
And even if you get stuck there for longer than you should, right? So, Diane, can you relate to what Zibu was saying earlier about being from a very certain place? Kimberley is not exactly a huge metropolis, and that remember what you just said about the enema. so is that geographical space from which you come, has that influenced your writing journey, like Zibu's place where she grew up influenced her writing?
Look, we're the products of the places we come from, whether we love them or we want to not be associated with them. And I haven't lived in Kimberley since I was 17, and I wouldn't live there and I wouldn't go back there. Because a lot of places, especially in South Africa, spring out of an artificial origin. Usually some like vast, awful commercial exploitative thing, diamonds or gold or whatever. There's no reason to live there. There's no integral kind of reason. It's not yeah. So your idea of beauty has got to be something that you make for yourself, right? Which is what writers do. So writing is neurodivergence. It's a weird way of looking at things. And the place that you come from is at once so familiar to you and unfamiliar, weird, that writing about it is a way of making sense of the things that happen there and who you are. So yeah, being an ambassador for a place is one thing, but I think it's the thing that writers all have in common is that they aren't linked to specific geographies. They're kind of conglomerates, the way that rocks are, I suppose.
And Zibu, you said that you in your life have not migrated a lot, and yet your character in your debut novel that we are celebrating here at the festival, The Thing with Zola, has traveled quite widely. Please tell us about this wonderful woman.
So, like me, Zola is from Ekurhuleni. We have the airport and not much else. So, thinking that the grass is always greener, it's a thing. It's how everyone feels. You're not special for wanting to travel. Everybody who is in the East Rand wants to get out. Maybe that's why the airport's there. But Zola wanted greener pastures, like lots of people everywhere in the world, actually. She's looking for greener pastures. She gets to the greener pastures. She feels like, yay, but then she's rejected. She needs to come back home. And another similarity we have is I also had just come back home when I started writing this book. I had gone to the greener pastures of Randburg.
The greener pastures for Zola are
Germany. She
and
had
Munich.
a bursary and she was studying in Germany, but her plan was she's going to keep studying, and then eventually she's just going to live there. And it didn't happen that way, and she was disappointed. She came back. When I left home, I was going to Randburg. I was actually moving to be closer to home. But while I was there, I started feeling like maybe this is home. Maybe I can settle here. Maybe, and like her, I was also rejected, came crashing back home. I find myself in Thokoza, and like Zola, it's not that bad. Like, it's different. You can still make that lovely life you want for yourself. It's just not going to be the one you imagined. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
Shifting the way you're thinking.
Mm-hmm. So, to take you back into your childhood, but first maybe to ask you, it's quite clear from your story and the introduction to your book that quite a lot of the content of this wonderful poetry volume, Unraveling, is autobiographical. I would like to ask you to read the poem "Have You Eaten" for us, and that will lead us into the next question.
So, let me just find it. Indexes
It's
are a
60.
very useful thing. Okay, 60.
Mm-hmm.
16. Okay. Have you eaten? I come from a long lineage of proud and brave heroes. Stories of their greatness were passed from father to child, with the cycle repeated when the child became man. His was the mantle of keeping the stories alive in memory. All this is untrue. Well, not exactly. It could very well be, but I would not know. You see, ours was not a love which had me seated below, little arms wrapped around their calves and head perched on their laps, waiting to be regaled with oral history spanning generations. Ours was a "have you eaten" kind of love, the kind which left my fees paid, stomach full, and my body clothed. Ours was a love that made sure there was a roof above my head and it did not leak. Ours was a love of needs met, where I love yous went unsaid, one that pushed me into the cold embrace of excellence and kept tabs on my progress from afar.
From what you told us earlier, and just thinking of this poem, I wonder, you immediately connected your geographical journeys with the writing journey. So words were always part of it, but I would like to take you back to that very beginning that sort of this poem contradicts. But how did stories enter your life? Did your family read to you? How did you find yourself in that library? How did that storytelling enter into your consciousness?
I think if I think back like early enough, it was very much an oral tradition. I remember sitting with my grandfather, and we had boiled peanuts, and he would crack the peanuts up for me and put them in my hand and feed them to me. And as this was happening, he was telling a story. It was either about a hare or a rabbit, some animal folklore, and why the turtle has X amount of scars on its back and things like that. And I think that's when I remember engaging with storytelling for the first time, really. But when it comes to like engaging with the written, I come from a very, I guess, academic family. Words were always important to us, writing things down, remembering. And one of the ways in which that was developed from a really early age was getting encouraged to read, and not only just read, but having to, if I wanted any pocket money, I had to write a book report, you know, and that was how I got some funds as a child who didn't know very much about money. But that's what it was, and it wasn't just about that monetary aspect, you know. I remember the first time I ventured out and I wrote book report in French instead of English. The excitement around that was just a little bit different, you know, and just noticing those little, so I guess, yeah, that's how, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Zibu, for you, how did stories enter your life as a child?
So, my mom had a debilitating stroke when I was 5. And everything in the house, in the home, had to change to accommodate her new needs. And so there aren't as many outings for the kids. You're not going to go anywhere. You're going to go to school and you're going to come straight home. You're not going to the movies. You're not going to the theme park. So you need to create that theme park in your own mind. You need to entertain yourself somehow. There isn't so much on SABC 1, 2, and 3, and then later ETV. I mean, there's only so much you can watch. So we read a lot. If there was one thing my dad did not mind spending his money on, it was books. So we read and we wrote and we imagined. Me and my brother wrote comics and little stories for each other, and we exchanged them and we read them, and that was how we kept each other entertained.
I did that with my brother too.
It's sweet, isn't it?
Yeah, wonderful.
Sorry, can I just say, this is reminding me of something. When I was little, and this is the first thing I ever wrote, I think. I didn't know how to write, and I didn't know how to spell, but I wanted to write my sister a letter, right? And I don't remember the contents of that letter, but what I did is I knew the first letter of every word. And I would just write down the first letter of every word, and I expected her to be able to magically understand what I was saying in that letter. After writing it, even I didn't understand what I was saying, but yeah.
Wonderful. That's where imagination comes in, yeah. And Diane, for you, stories?
We never bought books because we were quite poor, but we spent a lot of time at the library. And I remember my mom used to read horror. She'd have these piles of books next to her bedside, which is how I got into Stephen King. But it was also those awful, like, Virginia Andrews, the flowers in the attic, and all those, like, really gory things where horrible things happen to children, which is a bit worrying. But part of coming from a very specific time that isn't documented in literature is feeling that you want to put it on the map, that you want to talk about the small place that you come from, the very specific thing that makes it not unique, but detailed, rich. Yeah, I read a lot. Books, but also, yeah, it's a tough one. Often children who trade reading for a living, who are witnesses rather than actors, are doing it because they feel excluded in some way, that they don't have friends or they're not part of the cool group. So it's not always a healthy thing to do. Often if there's something horrible happening at home and they're trying to escape it. Books, eh?
Your writing journey is, I think, the longest here on stage. tell us, because we also have a very special connection that you acknowledge. I need to say straight out, I am actually Diane's publisher now. So the book that we are discussing today, from which she read, Inside Your Body, There Are Flowers, is a short story collection that we published together. And in your acknowledgements, you mentioned the kind of journey that we traveled together without really traveling together. Can you take us back how this book connects this book? And I will show you something afterwards about this book. Yeah.
So the great thing, one of the great things, obviously not the main great thing, but one of the fantastic cultural corollaries of post-1994 South Africa was a new way of doing things. So that was music and writing and fashion and all sorts of things. So you could suddenly do your master's in creative writing at a university, and someone who had written books and who was relatively famous would be your mentor, and you would spend 2 years or whatever with them, and you would just see what you wrote. Obviously this was something you had to pay for, but they would just spend time with you, and it's kind of crazy. So I applied to UCT. They lost my application. I applied again, and then Andre Brink, the writer, offered to be my supervisor to produce this manuscript. And so it was a couple of short stories about Kimberley, about my dad, and yeah, I think he was just very interested as a mature writer of seeing what the new stuff was going to be. So he had a lot of students, and then you'd meet every 2 weeks, and I mean, it's lunacy if you think about it now. I would go to his house, he would sit with me for 2 hours, and we would just talk. We would talk about writing and look at what I'd written and talk about it. And then at the end of that, without my knowledge, he took the manuscript to his publishers, and he got me a book deal, which doesn't happen. It's not a thing that happens. So that's our connection. And that was a long time ago.
For those of you who don't know, this is the house that I now live in. So yeah, it has a lot of literary ghosts and wonderful stories in it. And I would just like to show Diane this, and you can have a look afterwards. So this is Andre's copy of your book that you didn't sign for him. You just commented here. He got a complimentary copy from the publisher with the price. It was March of 2,370 rand, so not for resale, basically. And Diane didn't sign it for him. She just has 2 question marks next to that sticker. I'm shocked. So a little bit of literary history.
Yeah, it's a thinly veiled memoir, which still enrages some members of my family.
Zibu and Sue, how did your writing, so now the stories were in your life from early on in your childhood, how did the writing then begin? When did you start realizing that what you were doing was more than just writing or attempting to write a letter to your sister or trying to correspond with your brother? When did it become more than that? When did you feel like, ooh, I want to aim at this object, the book, the published thing?
I would say the first time I got a taste a taste of validation in the writing, because it can be so isolating and lonely. But it was a very because I remember in high school I was part of the Press Club Society, and every year we released a magazine with like stories and poems and articles and things like that. And I joined very early on. In high school, and I would write little poems. I look back and I cringe now, but back then I would write, and we were a school of 600 people, and not everyone's stuff made it in, and they accepted my poem or my short story or this or that, and that was very gratifying. It made me think like, oh, okay, maybe I can do this thing, you know, maybe I have words to say, and it's kind of stuck with me, writing poems through that way, yeah.
And this book in particular, because I hope it's available in South Africa.
Yes, it is. It's available via the
Yeah.
Book Lounge.
But it was published in Cameroon.
Yes, it was published in Cameroon by this publishing company called Langa, and it's affiliated with the African Books Collective. And what they do, they promote writers from within the continent. It's originally a Cameroonian press with ties to various universities around the globe, and they just promote African literature. So it's yeah. And if I want to think back to the times when this book actually started taking shape, you know, I was never not writing, you know. I would think about things, I would observe things, I would feel things, and I would try and put pen to paper and make sense of it as a way of processing, of trying to feel some kind of relief. And then I don't remember what exactly triggered it, but I was leafing through like the various poems and collections and various of my poetry as standalone things, and I was trying to find ways to bring them together. You know, I was trying to find themes and common threads, and I think that's where this actually started, the starting to curate things as a singular unit rather than several different poems touching different things.
Zibu, this is your first book with your own name on it, but it's not the first book that you have written.
No.
Can you take us back on that journey that you traveled as a ghostwriter first before this wonderful debut?
So I always wanted to write for a living, and my career has been different moves of trying to find a way to make money doing what I love. I was a journalist first, and then I was a storyliner for a soapy, and I did copywriting, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then the ghostwriting. Just after the pandemic, all the journalists are losing their jobs. What am I going to do? I started with the ghostwriting. A lot of it was stuff that I thought was out of my comfort zone, but turned out to not be out of my comfort zone. Romance, erotica, and fantasy, things about vampires and werewolves, and I didn't make millions, but I loved it. I was happy, you know. I wasn't upset about waking up in the morning, and this is what I was doing. And a friend that I met through that network of ghostwriters, the spooky people, she told me about an open call from Pan Macmillan that they're looking for female writers. Look, you should contact this person, you should try, you should do it. And I wasn't very keen because I thought I'm okay being a ghostwriter, right? But once you put your name on something, it will always be associated with you. So if you write a book and this book is, God forbid, terrible, like it's awful, you will always be associated with this awful, terrible book. No matter how good you get, it'll be which Zibu? Zibu who wrote that terrible book, you know? So I wasn't sure how I felt about that. But I did it anyway because she nagged and she told other people who also nagged, and I did it, and it is not terrible. Yay!
I promise you, it is absolutely delightful.
Thank you.
And I've told Zibu beforehand, I've been doing quite a lot of heavy reading in the last while. And what I loved about her book is that she manages to transport quite very important and everyday themes that are not easy to deal with, but in a way that is simply delightful. So the entire story, it has so many twists and turns, and it is so surprising and entertaining until the very last 2 pages. I thought, well, surely I know where it's going, but I didn't. And it was so refreshing to read something that surprised me every page. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And tell us a little bit more about the ghostwriting. So are you ever going to admit to what is floating out there under your pseudonyms?
Even
Or-
if I wanted to, I'd get sued.
Ah.
There's a contract.
Okay.
You see?
There are other people's names on your
It's
story.
somebody else's intellectual property. It is not mine, so I cannot and would not ever claim it. I'm happy with my book. Everything else, well, no.
Your books would have been very difficult to discuss together in their own right. So if we weren't talking about your writing journeys, to try to combine the themes in your books would have been quite a challenge. And yet, there is one thing that all three of them have in common, and I think it's very beautifully done in each one of the books. And I would like to introduce that theme by asking Zibu to read a passage from her book on page 100.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay.
if you could.
Sorry, Toby, right? From here?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is this is the two sisters in the book.
But also, why would he lie about being Ogusle's boyfriend? And now, sis, Tobile burst into the room. What do you want? Zola replied grouchily. Zola had never particularly liked sharing a room with her sister, but times like this made her hate it all the more. You've had Mom shaking since last night. What's going on with you? Zola sighed. I need my own place, she announced. Tobile rolled her eyes and started unpacking the laundry basket. Just one night, living large, and you're too good for this place, she mumbled. Seeing her normally perky sister looking so dejected, Zola suddenly felt guilty. She knew better than anyone how hard her mother had worked to make sure they had a good home. It wasn't a particularly nice home, but it was a good home. They'd never had to wonder if they'd have something to eat. They'd always had what they needed for school, and they'd never struggled with anything. Sorry, Toby, I'm just a little stressed out. Work stuff, Zola said. It was meant as an excuse, but now that she thought about it, she really was stressed about work. Seeing Oguhle in hospital and now knowing her lunch and conversation with Mbali were completely out of line. Whether or not she'd known it at the time, she had violated the girl code.
So I think that what your books do also really movingly is to talk about the relationships that children have with their parents. So in your stories, in your poetry, and in your novel, that topic of parents mostly wanting to do their best and failing at some point, but also just trying really hard to be the best parents they can be, and then the way this influences the children and how they respond to that. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how it informed the individual stories, so that parent-child relationship or the parents-children relationships, and you please, feel free to go into the autobiographical aspects of those stories if you feel like, but you can talk about the fiction only. So, Zibu, would you like to start?
Okay. So my experience with my parents, the way I saw it then and how I see it now, is completely different. So I already said my mother had a stroke when I was 5, right? She became quadriplegic, but she maintained her personality. She didn't speak, but my mother had always been very strict. She wanted things just so, and she communicated with us. This is why I learned how to spell, actually quite early. She used a board and spelled each word out. So can you imagine being disciplined? Letter by letter. It's a lot. So that was my mother for 5 years. We'd come home from school and then you spell out, where is your homework? Do your homework. And you're there trying to switch on the TV and she looks at you and you can hear her looking at you. So that was my mom, and I thought, she's this woman. She passed when I was 10, and I missed her, and it made my dad's life a living hell. He tried to date. His wife has passed on now. He can date. He should be able to date, but will his daughter let him? No. I was in my dad's face all the time. I was like, this woman, you let this woman get in the car, you let this woman touch me. And now, as a single mother trying to date with a son, I feel
So this is life saying karma.
my father has been avenged. So my parents passed when I was very young. My father when I was 15, my mother when I was 10. So my relationships with parent figures, I mean, sorry. I know everybody always feels sorry for the orphan, right? But you pick up parent figures in every situation in your life. I go to work, there's a work mom. You know, at the store, there's a woman who knows exactly which product to use, and you get parental energy from them. And that is what inspires the parental figures in the books, because I might not have my own mother, but I know a mother. I have interactions with a mother. I have interactions with a father, and you know, it's not completely foreign to me. So yeah, Nomsebenzi is a feisty mother, like my own mother, but she's also got characteristics from all the other mothers who have mothered me through my life.
It's a very moving relationship. I think it's because it's mostly a love story, and yet I think that there is this beautiful love story between the daughter and the mother in the background of this more traditional romantic love story. That
Coming to understand your mother now as a grown-up woman.
Yeah. And Sue, for you?
Yeah, I think there's something interesting that happens when you quote unquote grow up, you know, and the veil beneath your eyes gets lifted, and you kind of see these people that parented you and raised you and gave of themselves, and you see them as people. You know, everything is stripped bare, and you see them as people for who they are, their likes, their dislikes, their aspirations, where they ended up, and I think like Zibu, I think it changed and shifted over time. You know, there was that very what's the word I'm looking for? There was that very hard dissatisfaction, you know, with the state of the relationship at some point, and that evolved over time to understanding and appreciation for what it was that you were given, and how it was that love was shown in those contexts, and really finding ways to not diminish it, you know, finding ways to recognize the importance of that as one of the many ways of loving.
And in your poetry, how free do you feel to explore those relationships where you know exactly that your family will be reading your poetry, and there is that always, I think it's much more difficult for a poet to escape that autobiographical aspect, even though one hopes that readers don't automatically assume that every I is you in the poetry.
Yes. So this, I'm actually gonna be honest, this poem almost didn't make it into the book. It really almost didn't. And I remember I was at the Red Wheelbarrow. There was a reading by Nyamnjoh, and I think we were just having a conversation, and we were talking about the pressures of putting yourself up and offering things, and the uncertainties and anxieties around the reaction to it. And she said something to me. She said, "The I is fictional," you know, and that was liberating, you know. And from there, I kind of rushed back and slid it back into the collection before sending it off to the final leg of publishing. So there is a lot of uncertainty around how will it be received? What will people think? Will people think that this is me? You know, so there is that, and I don't know how to deal with it. I think it's just taking a deep breath and putting it out anyways. Yeah.
And Diane, for you? because those relationships are really almost at the center of the book. So the child-parent relationships.
But writers are also ferociously mining their lives for material. I feel like everyone knows my stuff now. My dad was an addict. My mom's people picker wasn't working very well. Lovely woman, but like a total victim of the patriarchy, basically. Just allowed men to suck the joy out of her. It's in the space of a single generation, I feel like it's changed for women. There's been real change. And also I feel like I'm a teacher, basically, and I feel like there's an odd kind of distinction that we make between children and adults. That children are somehow unable to make judgments or think carefully about things, and that adults are automatically imbued with some kind of authority and wisdom. And the opposite is often true. And what I want from people, the way I judge people, basically, is whether they're open or closed to things. And we should all theoretically be open to our children if we're parents. Just to look at them and see who they are and ask them what they want and say no a lot of the time, because people need that too, especially children. They need you to go, this is not okay. It's weird. I don't know why we feel these needs to make these artificial distinctions. They don't help us. They don't serve us. And the one thing I was thinking is that I'm quite glad that my parents are dead. And it sounds like a callous thing to say, but I feel like we're like the ham in the sandwich, for those of you who eat meat, and are not Muslim or Jewish, we're the ham in the sandwich now. Middle age, you're looking after the children, and now you're also looking after the old people. And it's bad. There's no happy ending there. There's so much Alzheimer's, there's so many operations, there's so many sadnesses. And I mean, you kind of had a very premature look at how that happens, but that's what happens to every happy, loving family eventually, is that you end up with a carapace of your parents. It's terrible. I'm sorry.
To possibly lift the mood a little bit. Also, I would like to, because it's such a vital relationship in my life, also in connection to writing. When I saw, Sue, that you have in your biographical note, she is the mom to Shola. There are a few words in between there. Please tell us about Shola and how Shola influences your writing life.
Thank you. I am on a stage talking about my cat. This is peak joy. Peak joy. For those who do not know, I'm going to give you guys her full name. She has 4 names. Adeshola, Abeni, Afanui, To. And all of those mean variations of the crown that brings us joy. You know, I got her at a time, it was during COVID. You know, we all went through COVID. We know what it was like. And I was craving intimacy, companionship, all of those things. And so I got this cat, and she's absolutely transformed my life. She's this little ginger kitten. Doesn't really grow, so she's a miniature size. Contact me outside if you want to see really cute pictures of her. But yeah, I'll be outside with my gallery and you can see. Oh, she's got an Instagram page called Shola the Kitty.
And obviously she loves your book, right?
No, she absolutely loves it. I remember when the copies came, and I got some copies from the printers, and it was a tower, and she just went and sat on top and like moved around a little bit and made biscuits, and that was her spot. That was her throne.
And she loved the box that they came out of.
Yes, of course, of course.
So before we turn into completely cat-crazy ladies, writers, I think it's that time when we can hand over to the audience. Please let us know there is somebody showing off their pictures of a cat. Do you have any questions for our 3 wonderful writers?
Let me try to ask this question. in a gentle way. I'm often troubled by the interests in the author's biography. So I'm curious about why do we often talk about the author's biography instead of talking about the literature itself? I understand the concept here, but it is a little bit weird to me that both, especially the audience, often the audience of literature are very interested in who is behind this and how is the relationship between the I in a poem and the author. And today in the session we also started by investigating the biographical geography of all of you. And it kind of shifts the focus away from the literature somehow. So I'm interested in why is it that we are often doing that? What is it that is drawing us to that perspective when we talk about literature, or when we talk about books?
If I may, well, we were assigned this topic, so that is one thing. But also, you are all here, so I assume that people are interested. And I think I don't always make that assumption, or 99% of the time. When I open a book and it says I hardly ever think about the author, even when it is poetry. It's only exceptional, actually, for me to consider who is the person who writes a book. So it comes out in panels like this, at launches, at events, but I hardly ever wonder about the private lives of authors when I read a book.
Oh, I do.
You do?
I want to know.
Okay.
Give me the deets. Can I answer and say, I think if someone is writing about a specific topic, I want to know that they have some authority writing about it, and especially if it's something not great. So I don't want a high literature take on experimental work on women's boobs, which is basically Western literature up until this point. I want people's lived experiences, because we're channels for language, and love. It's a hard thing to talk about, because language is necessarily an obfuscatory thing when you're talking about a feeling. But language is a way of conveying what's important about how to live. And people read books because they want to know how to live differently to the way that they're living now, or, maybe confirming your amazing life choices. I don't know. But they're clues. We want clues. Lots of books, certainly for me, are a kind of narrative therapy, which is a whole idea in and of itself, that we are our stories, and a way of getting past our stuckness in a trauma is to tell our stories all the way through. It's like having an earworm, something that's repeating in your head over and over, and how do you stop this thing happening? It's so intrusive, is you sing the song till the end, and then you can think about it properly. Mm-hmm. So for you personally, you need to decide what you want from literature and how it talks to your life, because that's why we read. We want to know how other people's lives have worked out and what we can take from that. Mm. It's an evolutionary thing.
I think a connected question to that is, would you want to read an author whom you absolutely would detest in real life, like they are an awful person,
No.
But they are writing incredible literature?
No, I wouldn't, because I was actually having this conversation with my friend last night, and I was like, at what point does the harm that people do invalidate the successes, invalidate these things that they have written, whatever they're putting out? At what point do we say that we need to stop consuming, because these are not people that we want necessarily? These are extreme people, but these are not necessarily people that we want in our society, so why are we engaging with this work? So at some point the harm trumps whatever output they're putting out. So yeah, I would not want to.
Mm-hmm. Zibu, would you like to add?
Well, to agree with Sue, it's like how nobody can see Dr. Huxtable ever again without thinking of somebody dosing women's drinks at parties. It becomes, But to answer you, sir, when it comes to literature, it's, when you have a drink of something really good and then you have to look back at the can and see who makes this. I feel like this is what that is with literature. Like, I really enjoyed this book. Who is this? I think that's what it is. And you try to maybe get into the mind of the person who, allowing somebody to influence your thoughts is a very intimate thing. And when you read a book, you're letting a stranger go through your brain and plant ideas and seeds in there. And coming to literary events like this, meeting authors, hearing what makes them tick, hearing their thoughts, it's getting to know somebody who possibly planted an idea in your mind, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, if it's for you, yes. If it's not, then that's what I think.
Do we have any other questions?
Coming with the mic.
Related to this, I think those two topics are so big that you just touched on. Those two topics, one of the different genre of writing, of whether the author is present or whether absent. So you can have sort of post-structuralist type novels that it's all about the form and so on. And the second topic about, do we read or have the art on our wall of someone who has done something awful? And that's another massive topic. I don't know that it's possible to do justice to either of those, but fascinating, and would love to at some stage pursue both. But thank you. I think your comment now was beautiful.
So a possible topic for next year. And we have a little bit more time, and I think your journeys are definitely, I'm hoping, continuing as a publisher anyway, but as a reader, I'm hoping that there will be more after these wonderful books. So can you tell us what is on the writing journey next? Zibu.
So it's all I know how to do, so I will continue to write. Romance it's not what I imagined I'd do. I thought I was a serious person. I'm realizing I'm not. I really am not. I thought I'd write things about politics and, those types of books. I wanted to change the world. But I'm realizing I'm a rom-com. If a person was a genre, I am a rom-com. And I'm glad I've discovered it. I'm not old yet, so I can, live on. And I'm continuing along that path. And hopefully we get to see exactly where Zola ends up soon.
Yeah. Well, I definitely would love to read a sequel. You definitely have a fan in me. And I think that, yes, it is rom-com, but what I loved about your book is how empowering it is for women to read Zola's story, because she really has an incredible way of finding her own path, her own journey. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah. And Sue, you?
Okay, so I am coming fresh off of conversations with Mahale last night. If you've ever been, you know what's it's about, what's happening,
highlight of every festival.
The highlight of every festival. And Maneo was on the stage, and they absolutely inspired me. And I got so excited after our discussion, and I wanted to explore different forms and I was like, because she spoke about it in such a sexy way, about how when you confine yourself to a specific kind of form or rhythm, and the things that come out are just juicy and beautiful, and I want to try that, and Nana was talking about the pleasure in doing research, because Nana has a beautiful book called The Sex Lives of African Women, and it's a very well researched and written book, and the research is pleasurable, so I want to engage in pleasurable research. I want to So that's the direction that I'm going, and I want to explore different settings, different scenes, and live outside of myself a little bit and see what happens.
As readers, we are definitely going to follow in your footsteps. And Diane?
I'm writing a novel about the Owl House. The working title is Empire of Light, which is from a Magritte painting. I'm so enamored of the research. I just want to keep doing that. Yeah, I also write textbooks, which I also enjoy. It's rigorous, and you feel like it's doing something useful. I don't know if that's true, but you feel like it's true. And my next project is a book dash book. And if you don't know about Book Dash, I'm going to tell you now. It is an NGO headed campaign to get 100 books to every child under 5 in South Africa as soon as possible. They've published loads already in all the languages. There's one coming up on the 14th of October. You get writers, editors, designers, illustrators into one venue for 12 hours, and you hammer out a book in teams. So they have a number of books by the end of it. It's amazing and invigorating.
Yesterday, during the conversation about the future of publishing, this is exactly what I mentioned, because the literacy rates in South Africa are really very, very dire, and people were asking how can we possibly support this cause, how can we make this better, and how can we create future readers. And for me, that's the easiest way how each one of us can create readers for the future, supporting initiatives like Book Dash. And there is some incredible stuff coming out of there. As an adult, I read those books with so much joy, because they are just exquisite.
And they're also free to download. You literally go to the sites. If you know anyone who wants to read books to their children, and a lot of them have no words, so it's the person who's taking care of the child, and it's an interactive experience. There are loads of different subjects and protagonists and whatever.
And all languages.
All languages. There's a sex one, there's a death one. You're going to love it.
So, creating new writing and collecting words journeys. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you for being here. The authors will be available downstairs for signing their books. Please support them and enjoy their work. It is really wonderful and a delight to read. Thank you.